Hello everyone, this is another clip about Gomerozdubar. He has been running all over the place, making claims that are completely unsubstantiated. In the following clip, as you will be able to see, I am red dotted, so I couldn't address Gomerozdubar properly. Despite several pleas from Christians in the room for Gomerozdubar to undot me in order to address him, he and the rest of the admins simply refused to do so. This is my reply to the 20-minute clip where Gomerozdubar uses the scattergun approach. Throw out as many different subjects in as little amount of time so that people will be overwhelmed, and hope that they don't check out your claims, of course. This is my reply to that 20-minute talk, which will only be interrupted by my commentary.
Amazing. Amazing the deceit, the sneakiness, the deception of our modern day Christian friends who live in America and all of a sudden want to erase 2,000 years of Holy Ghost atrocities. Notice he appeals to absolutely Christ the way. I'm appealing to the Holy Ghost. I'm not appealing to history. I'm appealing to the historical sources of your Holy Ghost. Which historian agrees that Jesus died on the cross? Which historian? Which historian? Name a historian. Name one. Just name one. And then we'll discuss why he believes so. Because most of the historians accept something called ratiate ex eventu. Ratiate ex eventu is basically called after the events. It is historians that basically rely on the New Testament for information. That's all it is.
Yes, most historians rely on the New Testament documents because they are the best sources that we have about Yeshua that come to us from the first century. Other than the New Testament documents, we have virtually nothing coming out of the first century that tells us anything about the Messiah, besides a reference from Josephus. Thus, since historians operate on the basis of early attestation as one of the criterion for authenticity and reliability, it goes without saying that the New Testament documents are the first and only source to go to for any historian who seriously wants to study or to know anything about the historical Yeshua of Nazareth. And then about his claim, reciete ex eventu. Gomerozdubar tries to sound sophisticated and scholarly in order to intimidate those that he tries to convince of his knowledge of things. This claim about reciente ex eventu is one of those claims that sounds convincing, but as we will see is a fabrication. In other words, it doesn't exist. I have done several searches on that term on Yahoo and Google and several online Latin dictionary, and it just doesn't exist. Here's an excerpt of all the searches that I've done. But notice how many times he will repeat his own fabrication in order to sound convincing to the audience. The words ex eventu mean after the event, but the word recienta or anything of the sort does not exist at all in Latin. Not only does Gomerozdubar make the mistake of inventing a Latin phrase that doesn't exist, but Gomerozdubar also makes the fallacious criterion that a historical document has to be rejected on the basis of being after the event. This will be discussed later.
They're using the paradigm of the New Testament to permeate writings about the crucifixion. Yet the crucifixion is not in any primary Christian literature outside the New Testament.
This is a dumb argument in every way. First, the primary Christian source about Yeshua is the New Testament. Anything outside the New Testament would not be primary but secondary at best, heretical at worst. Second, there is nothing outside of the New Testament that comes from the first century that can be called Christian. So how can we find anything that is independent from the New Testament documents that can remotely be considered Christian? Third, why don't you apply this unreasonable criterion to Islamic sources? Let's see what happened when we do apply this same criterion to the Islamic sources. Show me any Muslim sources that are independent from the Quran and the Hadith that talks about either Allah being the one true God, Islam being the religion of Abraham, or Muhammad being a prophet. It doesn't exist. Why? because everything that Islam has is built on the earliest reference to either Allah being the God of the Muslims, the term Islam, or Muhammad, and that reference is the Quran. Apart from the Quran, there is no reference to those three, and therefore there cannot be made any case for those three without the Quran. Any literature that can even be classified as a Muslim source is automatically linked to the Quran, or else it's not a Muslim source. Likewise, any literature that can even be classified as Christian source is automatically linked to the New Testament documents. This is the irrationality of the argument that Gomerozdubar makes here. Yet he thinks he has blown the evidence for our position out of the water. And, of course, all the Muslims think he makes good points, since they are completely uncritical of the arguments he makes. They are happy to throw out anything at us, no matter how unreasonable or fallacious the argument actually is.
This is something I want Muslims and Christians to realize. The crucifixion of Jesus is not in any primary Christian literature that is independent of the New Testament. It is not in the Nag Hammadi. It is not in the Gospels of Thomas, Philip, the Damascus document. It is not in any independent Christian literature.
There are so many errors in this argument alone that it becomes embarrassing to listen to. Gomerozdubar saying these things with such confidence and flair about the Nag Hammadi documents. For those that don't know, the Nag Hammadi documents are 2nd century Gnostic documents that have very little to do with the testimony that we find in the 1st century literature, in that they are considered heretical by authentic Christianity. So since they aren't accepted as canonical, critics have claimed that these documents were expunged from the canon of the New Testament because they didn't comply to Orthodox Christian doctrine. That's why Gomerozdubar appeals to them. However, there is no two ways about this. 1. Either Gomerozdubar has read the Nag Hammadi documents himself and thus came to the conclusion that there is nothing in those Nag Hammadi documents that mentions the Messiah being killed or crucified. Or, number 2, Gomerozdubar has not read anything from the Nag Hammadi library and makes stuff up and parrots what he has heard from other uninformed sources. Or 3, he has read them but just simply lies to his audience, hoping that his argument will stick. Remember, Gomerozdubar's argument is that there is nothing in the Nag Hammadi library considered by him as independent Christian literature that says anything about the death or crucifixion of Yeshua the Messiah. First, it should be asked, why Gomerozdubar claims that the Nag Hammadi documents are independent from the New Testament when they quote the New Testament frequently? For example, one of the documents he just mentioned, the Gospel of Philip, quotes extensively from the New Testament documents, as you can see here. Yes, they also quote from the beloved Apostle Paul, whom Muslims so love to hate without a cause. And now to deal with Gomerozdubar's claim that there is nothing in the Gospel of Philip about the crucifixion of the Messiah. We have gone over this and we have amply shown that the Gnostic Gospels, or the Gospel of the Nag Hammadi library, are filled with references to the crucifixion of the Messiah and his death. All you have to do is go to the previous video series called Gomerozdubar's Painful Exposure on Paltalk about Nag Hammadi. It's a 9 video clip series, so you can go there to check all the references that we have used. It's in the Gospel of Thomas, it's in the Gospel of Philip, it's in the letter from Peter to Philip, in the Apocryphon of James. Almost everywhere you look in the Nag Hammadi library, you will find references to the crucifixion of the Lord Yeshua. And that was just an excerpt of what we find in Nag Hammadi library. So how on earth can someone have read anything from the Nag Hammadi library and seriously claim that there is nothing in those sources about the crucifixion? That's why I said from the beginning, either such a person has read nothing but is just parroting what he has heard from others who are ignorant of these documents themselves, or he has read them but is just blatantly lying. Either way, Gomerozdubar, the darling of the Muslims on Paltalk, who is embraced as a knowledgeable Muslim of scholarly level, obviously doesn't have the slightest clue of what he's talking about, but again invents things as he goes along and throws things out hoping that they stick to make him look good. and hope that no one checks him out. But hey, why make a small thing as fact stop you, right?
There is no Christian literature which gives us an alternate biography of Jesus Christ that even mentions an ascension of Jesus as well.